enemy. And we just had a really lovely panel yesterday at the People's Forum. So you can find it at Code Pink Alert channel on YouTube. And it was a conversation about how we could be engaged together and all of the different ways you can engage. So if you want to check into that, please do. But today we're going to focus on one of the areas where we need to be engaged. What I brought up yesterday is that war is so hard to end because it's not relational in everyone's life, and it's hard for people to understand it. But there are two very important issues in this China is not our enemy. One is that the hate and the lies is driving racism. And that's happening. Hate crimes against Asians are up 800%. And sadly, a lot of that happens in middle school and elementary school. So think about that, that's pretty heartbreaking. The other is the existential threat that this Cold War on China is taking us to the brink of, and that is the use of nuclear weapons. First of all, we should not have nuclear weapons, but to be playing this game with two countries who are who do have weapons of mass destruction, unlike Iraq, where we knew they didn't have weapons of mass destruction, used it as a lie. Here, this is a very serious game. So first of all, I want to remind you to engage on the racism issue. We have a letter to Kamala Harris. And as the first Asian American vice president of the United States, she needs to be speaking up in the Biden administration and say, stop the hate and stop the lies. And just last week, Biden came out with lies about China. So we know there's some work to do. We need to keep asking her. We were able to deliver 5,000 signatures to her last week. We want to be able to deliver signatures every week. We want her to feel this. So stay engaged. It's codepink.org/Kamala. The other big engagement we're in right now is that we have got to stop Michelle Flournoy by being appointed to head the Defense Department. So you can get engaged in that. And I just want to say the fight is on, and it's got, very clear people on both sides, and you need to weigh in. This is a serious, she is a warmonger. She has been for the Iraq war, for bombing Syria, for bombing Libya, the spending of $5 trillion and not been held accountable at all. And now thinks it's funny that she wants to get enough weapons together that she can knock out the entire China fleet in 72 hours. Not a way to create cooperation with a country. And so you can engage on this one at codepink.org/not her. And Angela will share both of those in the chat. So now I really want to get to, I'm so excited to have Cynthia on today. Cynthia Lazaroff is the founder of NuclearWakeUpCall.Earth and Transforming Our Nuclear Legacy. She's an award-winning documentary filmmaker and author of Dawn of a New Armageddon, a personal account of the Hawaii missile scare amidst escalating nuclear dangers. She's also engaged in Track 2 citizen diplomacy and mediation efforts with Russia, and has founded groundbreaking US-Russia exchange initiatives since the early 80s. She's produced films including US-Russia Relations, Quest for Stability, Morning Armageddon, a music video, and a mini-series including award-winning Hiroshima for Showtime and Cuban Missile Crisis for NBC, and Mother Russia for HBO. So I really want to welcome you, Cynthia, and thank you for being with us today. What's interesting is I want to ask you, how do you accomplish so much? But I know it's really the passion that you have for the planet and life. Because when we first met, you were working on coral reefs and climate change. And now with that same passion and brilliance, you're working to eliminate nuclear weapons. I'd love to know what changed you, what changed your direction?
Well, listen, Jodie, thank you so much for that beautiful introduction. I am so honored to be here for this conversation with you today, and so grateful for all that you and everyone at Code Pink do every day for peace. For as long as I've known you, you've been lighting that candle for peace, and you are a great inspiration to me and to so many. So thank you so much. So now your question. Yes, I was doing that work, and after the Berlin Wall came down and after the Cold War ended, I had stopped worrying about nuclear war. And that all changed for me in 2017 when I was asked to work on this film. And I'm just going to share my screen now for a moment. Could I get my screen share working? Sorry. Is that something, Angela, you could enable me to screen share? Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. So all that changed for me in 2017 when I was asked to work on a film interviewing the top experts and former officials in the US and Russia on nuclear dangers and the state of relations. And I interviewed dozens of the top experts in both countries, and pretty much everybody I spoke to awakened me to today's staggering nuclear danger. The two people who awakened me the most were our US former Secretary of Defense, William Perry, and former Soviet leader, Mikhail Gorbachev. Secretary Perry said to me, "Today we're at a greater risk of a nuclear catastrophe than at any time in history, but most people are blissfully unaware of this danger." And then he said to me, "We are sleepwalking into a nuclear catastrophe and we must wake up." At that moment, I realized that I'd been sleepwalking since the end of the Cold War. When I came home a few weeks after interviewing Gorbachev here to Hawaii, where I live, to the farm, it was at the height of the fire and fury tensions between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un. And nuclear tensions were particularly high here in Hawaii because we knew that we had been marked as a target on Pyongyang's map of nuclear death. And we were actually getting instructions from our government on how to prepare for a nuclear attack and how to survive a nuclear attack. So all of this was in my consciousness and awareness on the morning of January 13th, 2018, when we awoke to this hauntingly beautiful sunrise, so haunting and unusual that we photographed it. And just shortly thereafter, as I was sitting in my living room in a conversation, I was one of over 1 million people across the state of Hawaii who got this message on my cell phone: ballistic missile threat, inbound to Hawaii, seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. So at first it was, is this real? And this must be a hoax. And so we tried calling 911, but everybody was calling 911. We kept dialing. Nobody could get through because everybody got a busy signal because everybody was trying at the same time. And at that point, my partner said, "Well, our girls." And he said, "I don't know whether this is real or not, but I'm going to go get the girls." Our girls were 7 miles away in the town of Kapa'a. So he was out the door and I said, wait a second. We need a plan if it is real of where we're going to meet. I don't want to be separated. He said, "Call me in the car and we'll figure it out." He's gone. I'm standing there dazed. And I think, who do I know? Who's going to know? Who's going to know if this is real or not? And I immediately think of my dear friend, Felicia Cowden, a journalist, who's the first to know anything. And everybody takes her phone call. I started dialing her. I called her. I left a message. I texted her. I checked her Facebook page. Nothing. And after what seemed like an eternity, she called me back and she said, "Cynthia, the county is telling us to take shelter." And that was just it. It was like, my God, this is real. I've got to take this seriously. And so the first thing was, well, where do we go? There are no designated nuclear shelters in the state of Hawaii. So we decided, we have a neighbor who has a meditation cave in the cliff. That was the most sealed environment that we would meet there. But then the next thing was, well, what do I take with me? What do I do? And I looked at my phone and it had 12% charge. And I thought, oh my God. So I thought, does the cave have electricity? There are lights in there. Oh, okay. Maybe there's an outlet. So then I took a bag and I started throwing things in it. My phone charger, my computer charger, my purse, my passport, a shawl to wrap around my face in case there was radiation, and then leggings for the same reason. And then I stopped and I thought, wait a second, is there going to be any need for any of this if there's a nuclear attack? And then I thought, I don't know, but I just have to try to survive. And then the next thing was food and water. And I thought, I have done nothing to prepare my family for this. We're supposed to have a gallon of water per day per person for 2 weeks, and enough food for 2 weeks per person, a canned food. And I looked on the shelf and there were 2 small bottles of water. And I threw those in the bag along with a bunch of bananas. And then it was just, I got to get to the cave as fast as I can. I didn't know how many minutes we had. I didn't know if it was 1 minute, 5 minutes. I just didn't know. So as I got into the car, I thought of my daughter in LA. And I hadn't allowed myself to think of her until that moment. And if I had, I probably wouldn't have been able to hold it together. But I started calling her and I thought, I've got to call her to let her know and to say goodbye. And so it was ringing and ringing and ringing, and she wasn't picking up. And I parked the car and I started running towards the steps to the cave. And finally, at the foot of the steps to the cave, she picked up. And I said, Mackenzie, I don't know if you've heard or not, but we've all got a message on our cell phones and we're going to shelter in the cave. And I'll call you in from the cave again if I can, but I just want you to know that I love you. And she said, Mom, I love you too. And at that moment, time stopped for me. And I thought, is this the last time I'm ever going to talk with her, to hear her voice? Is this the last connection in this life to her? And then I thought, wait a second, is this not just about her and me, but is this about something much bigger? Is this not just one nuclear weapon from North Korea, but is this many nuclear missiles coming our way? Is from Russia, and are we sending many missiles back there? Is this the beginning of one of those accidental nuclear wars that Secretary Perry and all those experts are so concerned about? Is this the beginning of everything we know and love and cherish on this earth? Is this the beginning of life? Is this the beginning of the end of life as we know it? And at that moment I heard, Mom, go, go. And she jolted me out of it. And I said, Mackenzie, I love you. And I started running up the hill to the cave. And just as I got to the door of the cave, it opened, and it was my neighbor calling, and she was smiling. She said it was a false alarm. It took 38 minutes for our government to tell us by text message, which my cell phone wasn't working at that point in that place, that it was a false alarm. And even with everything that I knew about nuclear weapons and nuclear fallout and Hiroshima and Nagasaki and nuclear war and nuclear winter, and nuclear war was unimaginable to me until I went through those 38 minutes. And now it's inside of me as a mother, as a human being. It's in my gut, and it's a visceral understanding, and it's never going to go away until we eliminate nuclear weapons. And so that's why, Jodie, I've pivoted to this work, back to this work. And that's why I'm here today to talk with you all about the nuclear risk with China in this China is not our enemy campaign. So thank you.
Well, that is a very visceral story. And I think, I don't know everyone else, but it's quite frightening to hear. And yes, we're sleepwalking. And I think that woke you up with that experience. And you've now become the tuning fork for the rest of us to wake up. So thank you for that. So, as you look out, what are your concerns as we see this, the hate and lies being driven towards China and this new Cold War building? How do you see this nuclear risk with China?
Well, Jodie, I actually am concerned for many reasons as I look at this right now. And so first of all, basically, whenever I see relations between nuclear powers going in this direction and going down, alarm bells go off, because as relations deteriorate and go down, nuclear risk goes up. And it's a pretty simple equation. It's just what happens. So I think that the first important thing for your campaign, which is just thank you so much for doing this. I learned so much preparing for this because my nuclear relationship lens is through Russia primarily. But we always have to remember that there's a nuclear dimension to the US-China relationship, which people don't often talk about. And even if the probability of a nuclear exchange is low, it's still there and it's possible. As long as we have nuclear weapons, it's possible. And you only need to have one detonation to be catastrophic. So this deterioration in relations, for me, wearing my lens, is existential. And I think we can't forget that in this work. So we have to remember the stakes always keep our eyes on the stakes. So, and one of my main concerns is that when you have a breakdown in good relations, in engagement, and especially in communication and dialogue, this increases the nuclear risk. So when nuclear armed states stop talking to each other, especially in the context of what we're seeing with the China as enemy rhetoric, the rising tensions, the sanctions, the military buildup on both sides, when this happens, in a moment of crisis, the risk of misunderstanding because of poor communication, the risk of conflict, the risk of war goes up. And if war breaks out, the risk of escalation to the use of nuclear weapons due to blunder, miscalculation, misunderstanding, or mistake also goes up if there isn't good communication. So that's probably one of my greatest concerns. And we've basically seen the same alarming developments with Russia. We've basically stopped talking to Russia about nuclear risk and nuclear cooperation. You stop talking to your nuclear adversaries at your own peril. It's suicidal, omnicidal behavior. It makes the insanity of nuclear weapons even more insane and much more dangerous. So during the Cold War with the Soviet Union, we always, pretty much no matter what was going on with relations, had a safe space, an insulated space for arms control and talks on nuclear risk and nuclear risk reduction. That's gone. It's not there with Russia, and it's not there with China, again, at our great peril. We have real differences with both countries. They have grievances against us too. But we have to remember that in the context of the nuclear threat, that we have to create this safe space. We have to keep our eyes on the need to continue to reduce the nuclear risk and to ultimately work towards the elimination of nuclear weapons. And one of the reasons that Secretary Perry and Gorbachev and others have said that we're at such a greater risk today is because we've stopped talking to each other. We don't have this dialogue, okay? So combined with a breakdown in communication, I'm also very concerned about the risk of a conflict breaking out due to rising tensions in particular locations. And one of the places I'm most concerned about is the South China Sea. And I'm very grateful to Anne Wright for her excellent work in documenting the increases in the US show of force incidents in this area. So this is the second alarm bell or next alarm bell, I would say, in that goes off in terms of nuclear risk, is that you see, we have a situation, we have increased military activity in a place where there are already rising tensions. The tensions are very high, and we have poor communications. You put those three things together, and it's a recipe for disaster. And you can only be lucky so many times. We've been lucky. We have the same thing going on in the Bering Strait with Russia. We have the same thing going on in the Baltics with Russia. We can't depend on our luck to last forever. It's just we've been really, really lucky and blessed. My next concern, and this is a big one, we're seeing what we call in mediation a classic action-reaction cycle, and essentially the fueling of a new arms race. As relations have deteriorated over the past 10 or so years, and as the US has been building up its military in the Indo-Pacific, China has been modernizing its nuclear weapons, and it has been increasing its spending on nuclear weapons. And with estimates that they plan to double the number of nuclear weapons in their arsenal in the next 10 years, we've also been modernizing our nuclear weapons and increasing nuclear weapons spending. And so has Russia been doing that. And so essentially we're seeing the fueling of another arms race. Our outgoing president said he was prepared to, quote, accelerate and win an arms race with both Russia and China. And I just have to bring this up because yesterday in the Washington Post, there was an article, the title of which was Defense Bill Offers Biden's Team a New Framework to Counter China. So this new $740 billion Pentagon budget includes $2.2 billion for the first year to fund a new initiative called the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, which, quote, aims to establish a region-wide approach to countering China in its immediate sphere of influence. So it includes, among other things, funding for additional attack submarines that senior Pentagon officials say are vital for countering China's powerful maritime forces, unquote. And also the article ends with saying that there's an expectation that this deterrence initiative will see increased funding over the next few years. So probably doubling in 2022. So this is an arms race, highly destabilizing and highly dangerous.
And highly expensive at the cost of the needs of the people, so not only that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Jodie, I was just going to say, I have great concerns about the money being spent, as you just said, and not on the other existential threats we face right now, the pandemic, climate change, healthcare, human needs. I mean, it's insane, again, to use the word insane. Also, the more nuclear weapons we have, the more likely something is going to go wrong somewhere. So this is just all going in the wrong direction. My next concern relates.
You brought up the media. You brought up this article, so here we go. This is an article that, describes a reality without a question. The media is being determinant in the way it covers these things instead of questioning. Are you finding any media questioning, or I just find it all cheerleading?
Okay, Jodie, you've just touched on something really that gets at the heart of it. And it comes to this question of the role of the media. And I took a walk today. I read this article yesterday, and then I read it again this morning. And I took a walk on the land, and I was thinking about it. And suddenly this thought came to me: did they mention the word nuclear in that article? Did they mention the word nuclear risk? Did they mention how dangerous this is? And I came back and I pasted the article into a Word document and did a search for those words. Not one mention. Not one. It was just stating, as you just said it, stating what was going on without putting it into a context of what this means. What are the implications of this for humanity? What does this mean? And so this actually gets to the next thing we were going to talk about, but it's, I want to just say that during the Cold War, the media, and not all media, but largely, fulfilled its ethical responsibility to keep us informed on the clear and present nuclear danger pretty constantly. They are missing in action on this issue, not across the board. You asked who's doing it. The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, I just applaud them. They are doing this on climate and on nuclear day after day. They are publishing amazing articles, and there are others doing it as well, but they are the first ones that come to mind that are doing it. But in terms of mainstream media, you get an occasional article, but most of the information, like what you just said, Jodie, is being presented without giving the reader a context, without connecting the dots to what this really means. So because the media is missing in action and not doing their job, it's either because they're sleepwalking, or because, and I think part of it is also because we're now in a very different we're in a commercially driven, frenzied millisecond news cycle. That how can they grab your attention for 1 second, get you in the gut, get you to click on the article and read it? How are they going to get you to do that? So, and part of it, could be other reasons as well, the corporate structure of media, mainstream media, et cetera, et cetera. But whatever the reasons are, it's up to us to inform them and inform ourselves. We'll come back to this more, but I just want to touch on one more concern, which I think is really key to this question. And I want to go back to the screen share in just a second. We need to look at where this overall arms race fits in for China with Russia and the US, and how it fits into the overall global picture for nuclear risk and nuclear weapons, and ultimately for the elimination of nuclear weapons, where we have to go for our well-being. So when we're talking about China as our enemy and the nuclear relationship with the United States and nuclear weapons, we can no longer just look bilaterally at the US-China relationship, or at any relationship just bilaterally in the nuclear world that we're now living in, which is another reason why it's so dangerous today. During the Cold War, it was largely driven by everybody in either the Soviet camp or the American camp. Now it's a multipolar nuclear world with 9 nuclear armed states. And expert Robert Legvold, in my interview with him, said it, and it's slowly spinning out of control. And so we have to look at the China-US relationship on nuclear weapons with Russia because of actually a number of things, but things that China themselves have said. So I'm just going to go back to the screen share for a moment here. to have a look at this chart. So you can see this is the global nuclear arsenals. The United States has 5,800 nuclear weapons. Russia has 6,375. The next largest nuclear armed state is China, which is 320 nuclear weapons, about 1/20th the size of the US-Russia arsenals. So vast, vast difference. So over the past year or so plus, our outgoing president has said that he wanted to bring China into trilateral discussions on nuclear weapons reductions. And basically, China has said, if the US says that they're ready to come down to the Chinese level, China will be happy to participate the next day. However, we know that's not going to happen. This is Fu Kong, director of arms control in China's foreign ministry, and that China views the US push for trilateral arms control as purely insincere, hypocritical, and hostile against China. So basically, China's invitation is this: you come down to 320, and then we'll start talking. We need to take this invitation seriously. And a nuclear dialogue between and among all nuclear armed states is more important than ever now, but especially between the United States and Russia, we have to take the lead. It's up to us to come down to this level if we're going to make progress toward the elimination of nuclear weapons. And
well, how do we do that, make progress towards the elimination of nuclear weapons?
okay, so Jodie, the way forward, the pathway forward is to come down to the level of China. It's existential. And I just want to do a shout out to my colleagues at Global Zero. They have really outlined a very thorough, sound, verifiable pathway to get down to the level of China. And once we're there, to get down to zero nuclear weapons. But this is definitely the way forward. And so this is something that we need to be talking about. We need to make a huge priority, because this is the prayer of getting us to eliminate nuclear weapons. The next step is for us to come down to the level of China. So very quickly, this is the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute chart last year of military spending. I just think it's important to see these numbers. The United States, almost 3 times the amount of China, next highest military spender. Russia, the next highest, which is about 1/3 of China, which is about less than 10% of the United States. And then you can go down from there. But you can see that in the case of United States and China, military spending went up 5% in 2019, and in the case of Russia, 4.5%. So that's where we are in terms of military spending overall. I thank my friends at ICANN for this chart. Total spending in 2019 on nuclear weapons, almost 73 billion. You can see the United States over half of that. China, the next highest, less than 1/3 of the United States, and then Russia shortly following Great Britain and China. So I'm going to stop sharing right now. Come back. It's where we need to go from here. So we have an interdependent relationship with where we need to go. But the US and Russia have to take the lead, because China, the next highest nuclear power, is not going to play unless we do that. And I would have to just say that even if we use just 1/2 of 1% of the global nuclear arsenals, we have 13,500, right? That means about 67.5, just under 70 nuclear weapons, that it would be a civilization ending event that would be as a result of the billions killed. And then also nuclear winter brought on famine, global famine brought on by nuclear winter. So so when you think about the numbers that we just looked at in the arsenals, and it only takes less than 1/2 of 1% to mean the end of civilization, this is serious. This is devastating information, and it's existential. And to quote my dear friend and mentor in this work, Dan Ellsberg, he says that our chances of surviving this century are very small if we don't dismantle the US-Russia doomsday machine and then take these other steps once that happens. And he says that he doesn't think it's likely we're going to survive given climate and nuclear, but it's not impossible. And he's putting his heart and soul in what's possible, and so am I. But in order to achieve those reductions with Russia and then China, we're going to have to repair the hostility in our relationship, as Secretary Perry says. because we don't understand the danger, we're not repairing the hostility. We have to repair the hostility. We have to change our relationship to make these reductions possible. So, and we have
So Cynthia, the audience would like to know if you could share your slides so they can quit taking photos.
Absolutely.
So we'll send out the slides to everybody that's registered, and we'll put a link in from the YouTube. Thank you.
And I have other.
And then, cool. They also want to know what they can be doing.
Okay.
How do we? Let's give them some tasks.
Okay. So the first thing we need to do is to realize that this is not the domain of the experts or the elected officials. If nuclear weapons can destroy all of us, we all have a stake in working to eliminate them. And the first thing we need to do is inform ourselves. And we need to educate ourselves, since the media is not doing it on the mainstream level. And we need to talk to everyone that we know, our friends, our family, our coworkers. We need to educate the media. We need to hold them accountable. We need to do their job if they're not doing it. But the first thing we all can do right now is educate ourselves on the risks. The other thing is that our elected representatives are endowed with the authority to make nuclear policy. We have to let them know that this is a priority, that this is important to us. I sat with legislative aides for Republicans and Democrats in Washington, and they said, look, with everything on our that comes across our desks as important to our constituents, we're not hearing about this. And if we don't hear about this, our Congress people aren't going to do anything about it. So they need to hear about this. So we need to, I don't think anybody should be able to hold or run for office without being able to answer the question, what do you know about the nuclear risk? Generally, with China, with Russia, with Korea, with all nuclear armed states. And what are you doing about it? Are you supporting legislation to reduce the nuclear risk? There is legislation out there that is on the books, that's pending, put forth by everyone from Ted Lieu to Senator Markey to Elizabeth Warren. I mean, I could go, and if we can have the time, I can show you some of these things. But and we need to ask them if they're supporting this legislation. What are they doing about eliminating nuclear weapons, and about funding human needs instead of weapons? We have to educate them. We have to remind them of things like we have more nuclear warheads in the United States than hospitals at this time in the pandemic. We have to adopt the steps of the nuclear playbook, which is what our elected representatives need to do. And I'm just going to take one moment to share the screen, and these links will go out as well, because these are steps that I didn't come up with myself. But when I was writing the article, I said, I cannot leave people in despair. I have to give them something, which you just asked, Jodie, what can they do? These steps have been inspired by Secretary Perry, Gorbachev, all the experts I interviewed, and many people in the nuclear policy space and the nuclear disarmament space. And I won't be able to go into all of them, but I'm going to say a couple things about it. This playbook combines both things that we absolutely have to do to reduce the risk of a catastrophe with the weapons that we have, as long as we have them, and also has steps for eliminating nuclear weapons. So one of these is renouncing the option of using nuclear weapons first, which China has adopted a no first use policy. Although in my research in the last few days, there are defense experts who are wondering whether China is going to change that policy. Another one is to take our ICBMs off of launch on warning Cold War postures that really increase the likelihood of a false alarm that could trigger an accidental nuclear war. And again, China has had a policy where they have their warheads not mated to the missiles. But I've learned recently in some of the reading that I've been doing that there are questions now about whether they're going to maintain that. If you don't have the warheads on the missiles, there's not a risk of accidental nuclear war. Once they're on the missiles and their ICBMs, they're sitting ducks, and there's this risk of a false alarm. And actually, number 4, which is cancel the plan, it's it'll be up to $2 trillion really to modernize our nuclear arsenal. To cancel that plan, but that includes, and this is a recommendation by Secretary Perry and many, that we have to eliminate our ICBMs altogether. And then you can see at the top is maintaining a dialogue with all nuclear powers, no matter what. We also have no rules of the road right now for cyber and artificial intelligence. And this is also escalating the nuclear risk. We have to have conversations to create rules of the road, like we have for nuclear weapons, for these other emerging technologies that are being integrated with our nuclear decision-making. It's said that at least within the next 10 years, artificial intelligence will be advising presidents and their advisors on whether to use a nuclear weapon. Terrifying. That's why we have to be talking. So
that's not a question that should ever be asked, it should be something you don't ever do.
And yes, Jodie, absolutely. And when you're asking an AI who has no moral compass, it's ridiculous. It's insane. It's adding to the insanity. So again, there are lots.
I just have to say that I think maybe AI may have more of a moral compass than most people that I see working in the Defense Department. So I don't know, that might be debatable because they get that programmed into them. But I don't know what happens to the people that think that war is okay and dropping bombs on people is okay, and that the United States is still participating on dropping bombs on kids in Yemen. But anyway, we need to bring this to an end. So I think you've filled us with a lot of information. Just to close, what are your concerns and what gives you hope?
Well, I think to go to what gives me hope, I think what gives me hope is the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which has just had its necessary 50th ratification and will be coming into force on January 22nd, 2021. And I think that this is the rest of the world that's being held hostage to the nuclear armed states after all the years of pledging with the NPT that we were going to do something. They're basically saying, we're not going to wait. It's morally not only just wrong, it's morally not acceptable to have nuclear weapons anymore in the world. They have to be banned, like cluster bombs, like landmines, etc. And I see the direction. I see this creating a mandate. It's going to take time, but it's bringing me enormous hope. I think it has the potential to unify a lot of people across borders to come together. And I think we're going to see some people in some of the alliances cross at some point. I think, again, it's going to take time, but it also addresses, it's the first treaty based on humanitarian law, based on the disproportionate impact of nuclear weapons on women and girls due to radiation's impact disproportionately, and the disproportionate impact on Indigenous peoples. And it calls for reparations there. So that gives me enormous hope. That's where I'm putting my hope and heart and soul. And I think that although there was a lot of skepticism in the traditional communities, they said it would never be ratified. It's ratified. The winds of change are blowing, and we can do this. We did it in the 1980s. We can come together and do it again. We need to do citizen diplomacy, engage women, like Women Cross DMZ. You were involved in that. There's so many things that we can do. We can change the story. We need to build the contacts. We need to make the connections. We need to build the bridges. We need to do things like ping pong diplomacy. We need to do things that break through, like the Olympics, those visions, climbing mountains together, planting trees together.
Yes.
Contacts. That's what we can do.
Yes. Well, thank you so much, Cynthia, for teaching us so much today. I think the community looks forward to seeing more of those slides. The numbers are devastating, and we should know better as human beings. And it's going to take all of us to shout out. I mean, we're in a very strange time right now. I look at it as the same as when Code Pink started, the beginning of the Iraq War. Again, we have lies and hate driven towards what were, weapons of mass destruction that we knew weren't. But this time it's lies and hates towards, with two nuclear powers. And the problem is that our minds, our culture has been militarized in those 18 years. We had 20 million in the streets saying no to the Iraq war, and that's just been dumbed down. And we all have to know that the warmongers and the military-industrial complex works 24/7, and it's driven by greed and hate and power. And those of us who live life in gratitude for this planet, in celebration of life, and in cherishing each other, we got to get up and get out and get to work, because they're really taking this boat off the cliff. So Cynthia, thank you for your passion and all you do, and that you always enter as a good storyteller and with tons of facts. So I'm deeply grateful. Thank you, all of you, for being engaged in this. China is not our enemy, and the prices are too big to pay. So stay engaged. We'll give you something to do each week, and peace out.
Thank you, Jodie. Blessings. Thanks for all you do.
Bye.